Most of what they needed, they grew on their own place. So, first of all, they provided their own motive power. They didn't buy tractors, they didn't buy automobiles. They had horses and mules, and they grew them right there on the farm. They got them for free, except the cost of keeping the mare there. They grew their own fuel. About a third of their acreage would be devoted to some kind to grain, or to corn or oats or something like that they could feed to their animals. And if they went in town to get a few things, but mostly they grew what they needed on their own place. Food, fiber, clothing, all of that sort of stuff they had from their own place. And what happened was there was a circulation of money. They didn't use a lot of money. Incomes looked preposterously low, but these people lived very well. The fact is they didn't need money because they grew what they needed, and basically they got it free just for adding their labor to it. I mean, the sunshine is free, right? Farmers are the only people get energy for free. And so these were pretty much self-sufficient farms, but when they needed something off the farm, they went into town, the nearest town, and they spent their money there. And they spent their money with the local merchant. And their money that they spent with the hardware man went down here. He took that money and went down here to the cobbler and had his shoes fixed. And then he went to the next business, and the next business, the baker, the butcher, the whole thing. And so there was a circulation of cash that went from the farm through the community and eventually back to the farm when the farmer sold his produce. Now, it's not a perfect flow. I mean, there'd be leakages out of that. But you understand what I'm saying? Most of the money, most of the cash flow in the normal course of life, and our paying for the things that we have to have every day, food and clothing and shelter and that sort of stuff, most of that cash flow stayed right here in the local economy. It didn't drain out. So what that meant was we were spending money with our neighbors, and they were taking care of our needs. Now, I'm going to jump forward just a minute and put a little number in your head. There are about 30,000 people in Henry County, right? About 30,000 people. And you spend, on average, according to the United States Department of Agriculture, and we know the government's always right, you spend $1,800 a year on average. Every man, woman, and child spends $1,800 a year on food and drink. So if you take that $1,800 and multiply it by 30,000, that's $54 million. $54 million that is spent in this county on food and drink every year. And I say that to kind of give you an idea of how these local economies, I'm going to come back to that by the way, but how these local economies could function, because see, they were capturing almost all of that cash flow. None of it was going off to Florida to buy milk. None of it was going to California to buy artichokes or whatever else y'all buy from California, lettuce. You see, it was all staying in the local economy. The most important financial event in the 20th century took place in 1917. 1917. Y'all know what happened in 1917? Ford introduced the Fordson tractor. Ford introduced the Fordson tractor. It cost about $750. But here's what it meant. It meant that the farmer could plow a lot more acres a lot faster than he ever could with horses and mules. So farmers started buying those tractors. Now it also meant some other things too. It meant that farmer could no longer grow his fuel on his place. So he had to send some money out of the community up to Detroit to buy that tractor. And then he had to send some money up to New York to Standard Oil to buy the gas for the tractor. And now he was into it, right? Now he needed money. He needed cash to pay for those things where before he didn't need cash. Worse than that, Mama got a radio. And Mama and the girls would listen to that radio, and they decided they had to have all the things that they heard about on that radio. So he needed more money. You see, the lifestyle changed. So this was during World War I. It was the perfect world for farmers, because there were all these madmen over in Europe, millions of them, shooting and killing each other, burning up stuff all day long, and they needed to be fed and they needed to be clothed. So everything that could be grown in America could be sold at a high price. And that's what American farmers did. They did that. And they planted, they had those new tractors, and they planted fence row to fence row. And look, they had a third of their acres that had been planted before in food for animals. They didn't need that anymore. They could plant that too. And they planted and they geared up, and they were producing huge, huge amounts of agricultural commodities. And what happened? The darn old war ended. The market went away. And the depression in this country that you think started in 1934 or 1932 started in 1920 for farmers. And it never went away. It started in 1920, and so all those things that were happening in the 30s that Roosevelt tried to address with the New Deal agricultural policies, they were already problems. Farmers were already going broke back there in the 20s. And one of the reasons I know is because my wife's grandfather was one of those farmers. They had a plantation in North Mississippi, raised cotton, out of business, because the price of cotton kept going up and up and up, and so he wasn't selling his, he was just storing it up in Memphis until the price went to a nickel a pound, in which case, when he was broke. And it happened to thousands and thousands of farmers. So you have this agricultural depression that begins in 1920. And so what are the farmers going to do? Well, they had planted fence row to fence row to support that tractor and to buy that gas. And so now they pulled out the fence rows and they planted them too. And the price of commodities just kept going down and down and down. And you were in a whirlpool, a self-reinforcing cycle that they couldn't get out of. And then along comes the New Deal, and a lot of other ineffective government policies were put into place, but the idea took over that somehow or the other the government could save agriculture. Somehow or the other the government could save agriculture. Well, how did the United States get out of the Great Depression? Does anybody know? World War II, thank you. That's exactly right. The policies of the New Deal, which were enacted when Roosevelt came into power, all this great big emergency, those policies had failed by 1937, and there was a stock market crash in 1938, worse than the stock market crash of 1929. The policies did not work. They were not working to get the economy going again. And so it was only this huge demand from the war that came along that got the economy going again. That's not a good way to do it, but that's the way that they did it. And there was a sort of a deal made with the farmers at that time, and the deal was, we will give you parity or a certain percentage of parity if you'll produce. We'll pay you this certain percentage. We'll make sure you have a profit by paying you this certain percentage for the duration of this emergency. And then after the war, and y'all are wondering why I'm concentrating so much on agriculture, and I'll tell you why I'm concentrating on agriculture. It's this reason right here. For every one, agriculture, remember I said, farmers are the only people that get their energy for free. We're the only people that get our energy cost comes right there from heaven. You take 10 seeds and throw them out there, you get 500 back. It's the best deal going. There is nothing else like that in the economy. And because all the wealth of the world comes from the things men take from the ground, I'm going to say that again. All the wealth of the world comes from the things being taken from the ground. About 80% of it from agriculture, about 20% of it from mining, and that sort of thing. So $1 of farm income processes through the economy as everybody handles it and processes it, works it on through the economy. That $1 of income becomes $7 of national income. $7. So what happens if you take away the dollar of income that the farmer got? The whole country goes in the hole. And what has happened since 1947 is that the rug has been pulled out from under farmers, that some farmers have profited by the subsidies and so forth, but thousands, hundreds of thousands of farmers, under the influence of the government policy of get big or get out, those farmers have gone out of business. And the internal structure of agriculture has changed because before the 1940s, farmers didn't go into debt. As little as possible, they went into debt. And their object of their lives was to buy the farm, was to buy a place and get it all paid off and hand it on to their children debt-free. Well, along comes government policy that says you need to get bigger, get out. And then in addition to that, they promoted high inputs farming. High inputs, which means high inputs of machinery, high inputs of chemicals, high inputs of debt. And that too has worked its way through agriculture and put more and more farmers out of business. Now the fact is, the get big or get out policy was not a good one to begin with. Because if you'll think about it, a small farmer who has 350 acres and he is there every day watching over every bit of it has a lot more incentive to economize and do a good job than a fellow who's got 10,000 acres. I mean, it just, if you think about it, you realize it, and in fact, the statistics bear that out. So, here we come down, you're asking yourself, well, if all that farm income was removed, why did the United States go bust about 1965? The answer is the missing income from farm income, from agricultural production, was substituted, was replaced by debt. The standard of living has been maintained in this country by replacing production with debt. Y'all follow what I'm saying? If you want it, and if you go look at the